The story opens in Vietnam during a night operation, immediately placing viewers in a tense combat environment. Members of Bravo Company's 2nd Platoon are moving through dense jungle terrain and preparing defensive positions. The soldiers are shown as ordinary young men rather than action heroes, with different personalities and backgrounds already becoming apparent. An enemy attack erupts suddenly, creating confusion and chaos in the dark. The platoon exchanges fire with North Vietnamese Viet Cong forces while trying to determine where the attack is coming from. Several soldiers are wounded or killed, showing how unpredictable and dangerous their missions are. Staff Sergeant Clayton Zeke Anderson takes charge and keeps the platoon organized under pressure. After surviving the engagement, the platoon returns to base camp to regroup and assess losses. The consequences of the attack become clear. They are undermanned and need replacements. Anderson is tasked with traveling to division headquarters to report what happened and obtain new troops for the platoon. Staff Sergeant Anderson travels to division headquarters to obtain replacement soldiers for the depleted platoon. A group of newly arrived American soldiers are introduced as they begin their first day in Vietnam. The new arrivals display a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and uncertainty about what lies ahead. Anderson observes the replacements and quickly evaluates their attitudes and personalities. The contrast between experienced veterans and inexperienced newcomers becomes obvious. Some of the new soldiers still treat Vietnam like an adventure, while others are already frightened. Anderson gives them little time to adjust and makes it clear that survival depends on listening and learning quickly. The replacements are loaded onto helicopters and transported toward Bravo Company's area of operations. Lieutenant Myron Goldman is introduced as the platoon's young officer, working alongside Anderson. The replacements are loaded onto helicopters and transported toward Bravo Company's area of operations. During the flight, the young soldiers experience the reality of Vietnam for the first time, hearing gunfire and seeing the harsh environment below. The veterans remain calm and professional, while the newcomers struggle to hide their anxiety. Upon arrival, the replacements are immediately absorbed into the platoon without any formal introduction or training period. The episode emphasizes that new soldiers are expected to adapt instantly because combat operations never stop. Tension builds as the platoon prepares for another mission, showing that the newcomers will be tested almost immediately. The new replacements begin integrating with Bravo Company's 2nd Platoon. Staff Sergeant Anderson makes it clear that combat experience is the only real teacher in Vietnam. The veterans observe the newcomers and quickly identify who appears confident and who may struggle under pressure. Lieutenant Goldman continues to establish himself as the platoon's young officer while relying heavily on Anderson's experience. The soldiers prepare for another field operation rather than remaining at base. The newcomers start learning the routines of moving through hostile territory. The platoon travels into the jungle on a search mission. Veterans give practical advice about staying alert, spacing themselves apart, and watching for enemy ambushes. The environment itself is presented as a constant threat, with thick vegetation limiting visibility. The new soldiers begin to realize that danger can appear at any moment. Casual conversation between the men helps establish their personalities and backgrounds. The episode continues to emphasize the bond between experienced soldiers and inexperienced replacements. Tension gradually increases as the platoon advances deeper into enemy territory and prepares for possible contact with North Vietnamese or Viet Cong forces. Bravo Company's 2nd Platoon continues moving through the jungle during its field operation. The experienced soldiers remain alert for signs of enemy activity while the newcomers try to keep pace. The men become more cautious as they move deeper into hostile territory. Conversations between soldiers reveal more about their personalities and how they cope with life in Vietnam. Anderson continues to supervise the platoon closely and reminds everyone to stay disciplined. The newcomers begin to understand that even routine patrols can become dangerous without warning. The platoon examines suspicious areas and watches for evidence that enemy forces have recently been nearby. The jungle environment slows movement and increases tension because visibility is limited. Some of the newer soldiers show nervousness as they adjust to operating in combat conditions. The veterans demonstrate standard patrol procedures and quietly correct mistakes made by the replacements. The atmosphere becomes increasingly uneasy, as signs suggest enemy forces could be operating in the area. The platoon prepares itself for the possibility of sudden contact. The sequence continues to emphasize the uncertainty of infantry operations where long periods of waiting can be interrupted by violence at any moment. The platoon continues its patrol through the jungle while maintaining a heightened state of alert. Small signs in the environment increase suspicions that enemy forces have recently been in the area. The veterans become more cautious and begin moving more deliberately. The newer soldiers closely follow instructions as they realize how dangerous a simple patrol can become. Tension rises as the men prepare themselves for possible enemy contact. The platoon briefly halts to assess the surrounding area and reorganize its formation. Anderson quietly issues orders and reinforces the importance of discipline and staying focused. The soldiers spread out to reduce their vulnerability to an ambush. Nervousness among some of the replacements becomes more noticeable. The veterans continue to guide and reassure the newer members of the platoon. The uneasy silence of the jungle adds to the sense that something could happen at any moment. The platoon eventually encounters signs that confirm enemy activity nearby. The sequence builds suspense and reinforces one of the episode's main themes: survival depends on teamwork, experience, and remaining alert at all times. The platoon's tension increases as evidence of nearby enemy activity becomes more obvious. Anderson slows the pace and has the men move more carefully through the jungle. The soldiers remain spread out to avoid becoming an easy target. The newer replacements begin to understand how quickly a patrol can turn into a combat situation. Veterans continuously scan the surrounding area and quietly communicate with one another. Every sound and movement in the jungle is treated as a possible threat. The platoon reacts cautiously to suspicious signs and prepares for contact. Enemy forces suddenly engage the platoon, triggering a firefight. The soldiers immediately take cover and return fire. Anderson issues clear orders and works to keep everyone organized during the confusion. The newer soldiers experience their first real combat and struggle to control their fear. The veterans help steady the replacements and keep them focused on their tasks. The platoon works together to avoid being overrun and to maintain its position. The sequence highlights the difference between training and actual combat experience. The realities of Vietnam become unmistakable for the newcomers as they witness how quickly situations can become life-threatening. The firefight continues as the platoon works to gain control of the situation. Anderson moves between positions, directing the soldiers and adjusting their responses to enemy fire. The veterans stay focused on their duties despite the confusion around them. The newer soldiers begin applying what they have been taught and become more effective under pressure. Communication between squad members becomes essential for keeping everyone coordinated. Some soldiers provide covering fire, while others reposition to better defend the platoon's location. The men work together to prevent enemy forces from surrounding them. Fear and adrenaline are visible among the replacements as they experience the intensity of combat. The platoon slowly starts to gain the upper hand and forces the enemy to withdraw. The soldiers remain cautious, even as the firing decreases, because they know a second attack is possible. Anderson orders the men to check their positions, ammunition, and the condition of their fellow soldiers. Casualties and the emotional impact of the engagement begin to sink in. The newer soldiers realize that surviving in Vietnam depends on trusting the veterans and following orders immediately. The platoon regroups and prepares to continue the mission despite exhaustion and stress. The sequence reinforces the episode's main themes of teamwork, leadership, and adapting quickly to the realities of war. The platoon moves away from the area of the firefight and continues its mission. The soldiers remain tense because they know enemy forces could still be nearby. The newer replacements begin to settle into their roles after experiencing combat for the first time. The men discuss what happened during the engagement and reflect on how quickly events unfolded. Anderson checks on the condition and morale of the platoon. The veterans offer advice to the newer soldiers about staying alive in Vietnam. The emotional effects of the firefight become more noticeable among the replacements. The platoon resumes normal patrol procedures despite fatigue and stress. Lieutenant Goldman and Anderson continue working together to lead the men. The soldiers strengthen their sense of trust and dependence on one another. Small moments of conversation provide insight into the personalities and backgrounds of the men. The episode emphasizes that every soldier must adapt quickly to survive. The platoon prepares itself mentally for future encounters with the enemy. The final part of the mission reinforces the idea that there are no truly safe moments in Vietnam. The soldiers continue forward, knowing their tour of duty has only just begun. The platoon returns to base camp after completing its mission. The soldiers begin cleaning their weapons, checking equipment, and recovering from the stress of combat. The newer replacements appear more mature and less naive than when they first arrived. The veterans continue to watch over the newcomers and help them adjust to life in the platoon. Anderson reflects on the responsibilities of keeping his men alive. Lieutenant Goldman and Anderson discuss the platoon's performance and the challenges that still lie ahead. The men settle back into camp routines, knowing they will soon be sent out again. Casual conversations reveal that each soldier is dealing with the emotional effects of Vietnam in different ways. The replacements start to earn acceptance from the more experienced soldiers. The episode reinforces the importance of teamwork, trust, and discipline. The soldiers recognize that every mission could be their last. The pilot ends by emphasizing that this is only the beginning of their tour in Vietnam. The final moments establish the central theme of the series. Ordinary young men must quickly adapt to extraordinary circumstances in order to survive. The audience is left with the understanding that danger is constant and that the platoon will continue to face new challenges throughout their deployment.